think it's okay to think outside the box and question things. And I was having a conversation with an entrepreneur earlier today that I knew that if the conversation was being had publicly, it would offend a lot of people. It would ruffle some feathers and cause a degree of discomfort. But at the same time, I said to myself, well, if I can't share these thoughts here at NextOppSocial in this forum, where else can I share them, right? Isn't that ultimately, that's kind of why we started this group and this endeavor in the first place, was to educate people, to get people to actually utilize the cerebral cortex and think critically about their environment as entrepreneurs so they can adapt and be competitive and get out here and build thriving, successful organizations, not just simply surviving, right? And sometimes that requires that you deal with some real tough questions, or sometimes it requires that you deal with some challenges. And a lot of times these topics are a little bit uncomfortable. So I walked by a gentleman today that, and this is what kind of sparked it. I walked by a gentleman today that I met, I feel like about 5 years ago. Was real popular, had things popping here in the city. Considered a quote unquote success story. Real haughty, real arrogant. I didn't like him. But, one of my rules is I don't hate. I very, very rarely will hate on another entrepreneur, particularly in the Detroit community, because there's enough of that going on. So I try not to do that, especially in a public forum. But I didn't care for him. But that doesn't mean I didn't want to see him win. Had a couple of videos that went viral, received a bunch of titles and all this fun stuff from people in the city that, quite frankly, his track record may not have earned. But the bottom line is he was having success. He was having his moment of shine. And I applaud that, because if success is knocking on another entrepreneur's door, you should never really hate on it. I mean, if they're doing something like pejorative or something negative or something that is hurting people, that's one thing. But if success is knocking on the door of another entrepreneur, you shouldn't hate on it, because they're playing a game that you're playing, right? And if the ground is fertile for them, it means it can be fertile for you. If you're playing a game that somebody else is playing, if you're in the neighborhood that somebody else is in and success is knocking on those doors, it may knock on yours next. So you don't hate on them, right? In many respects, I walked by him today and he wasn't doing too well. To be transparent with you, he was looking kind of dusty. I know what dusty feels like, because I've been there. I know what it's like to be getting it out the dirt and you be looking dusty sometimes when you are getting out the dirt, when you're starting all over again, when you are relaunching or rebranding yourself. So it's all good. But it reminded me of a discussion I had with an entrepreneur even a little bit earlier than that. An entrepreneur asked me, why is it so difficult to crush it and win in Detroit? Why is it so difficult for Detroit entrepreneurs, and I'll go a step further, within the African American community, to win in Detroit? And I thought it was a fascinating question because, we just had an interview with Miss Christina Wilson, an attorney that has had a lot of entrepreneurial success, that has come back to Detroit to plant seeds. She's a Detroit product. And during the interview, she talked about the fact that you can take Detroit entrepreneurs, and whether we're in Los Angeles, New York, Philly, Miami, doesn't matter where we go, you'll see us crushing it. You'll see us having success. You'll see us winning in other environments. And oftentimes, when those other environments come back and make a huge impact. But on the flip side, I know a lot of people don't like to talk about this. We don't want to have the conversation. It can be very difficult sometimes for entrepreneurs to launch, grow, scale, and really, quote unquote, blow up, right? Whatever that may mean for you in the city. And that's just the reality of the matter. Most of the entertainers, most of the even athletes, most of the business tycoons, regardless of the industry I know of, they spend a considerable amount of time outside of Detroit. I remember I sat down with a gentleman approximately, that was about 4 or 5 years ago. Done very well for himself. He was a person who had left Detroit and came back. And we were sitting down and I was sharing, he asked me to share my resume. And I typically don't do that. Sometimes I don't want to ever feel like I'm humble bragging. But, I talked to him about what my resume looks like and a laundry list of accomplishments that I've had. And the more I spoke, the more his head kind of leaned to the side. He says, dude, why did you never leave? Like, what were you thinking? And I kind of looked at him because I knew where he was coming from, but still I wasn't expecting that to come out of his mouth. And he said, for real, why did you stick around here? And I was honest. I told him I stuck around for my children. I wanted to be available to them. I didn't want to be distant. I wanted to be present. And I knew the easiest way to do that was to remain in the geographic area where they were at. It was that important to me. The majority of my friends, majority of the people whom not all, but the majority of people whom I really wanted to work with or could get excited about working with left. I mean, they bounced. They're in New York. They're in Los Angeles. They're in Philly. They're in Atlanta. They're in Miami. They're in Charlotte. They're in Dallas. They're in Houston, right? These other places. And they're crushing it. And there have been many a day where I thought to myself, man, I need to get the hell up out of here and join them. But, I did what I did. I'm good with it. He says, I can respect that. But he says, with your resume, with everything you've accomplished and everything you've done, if you went to Chicago and did that, my God. If you went to these other places and did that, my God. And I reflected on that conversation when I saw the gentleman a couple hours ago downtown, who was, in his ugly duckling stage, going through that rebirth, right, that you have to go through sometimes. And it resonated with me. I'm all about making sure the ground is more fertile. I'm all about making sure that whether it's myself, the team, the cadre, the people I work with, but people, period. I just firmly believe that a rising tide lifts all ships. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address this. Like, how is it, once again, that Detroiters can go elsewhere and crush it and then come back and win? But a lot of times, some of our most talented, some of our most brilliant, some of our most effective minds and bodies oftentimes languish. And you gotta be willing to take that question on head on, There are just certain institutions, there's certain business owners, there's certain personalities and establishments that should have more shine. That should be nationally recognized, if not internationally recognized. And it just doesn't happen. What is that really all about? And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't address that as a NextOppSocial family. Right? Because that is part of our mission, to make the ground more fertile. Part of the reason why we share the testimonies, part of the reason why we share the stories, and we want people to say, if they can do it, you can too. Right? We try to take away as many excuses as possible. Okay, so you didn't come from the right family, you didn't come from the right zip code, you didn't have a certain skill set, you didn't have a certain talent, you weren't surrounded by certain things, but you can still get it in, you can still win. Right? That's kind of part of the pathos of what it is that we do. And so I thought it was something that would be interesting to broach and bring up. And I'll be real curious to hear the responses. I really want to hear it, right? And I know I'm going to catch some flack about this, whatever. I think it's important to address this question. Because even if you believe that that's not true, if you think the premise that I'm sharing is not true, I don't have time to go into statistical data, but trust me, it's there. But let's say you wanted to go there and to be completely dismissive. It still begs the question, how can we make the ground more fertile here? How can we make it easier for individuals who desire to put in the work, who are actually doing something to benefit others, right? Benefit the community, make a positive impact, and who have the talent and the wherewithal to accomplish some phenomenal things? How do we make the ground more fertile for them? I think it's one of the most important questions we can answer as entrepreneurs, for ourselves and for everyone else around us. Because once again, if success is knocking on our doors or success is knocking on somebody else's door across the street, you get excited because it can be knocking on yours as well, right? The same factors that determine their success can be working on you too. So, here are my thoughts after 10:55 p.m. And yes, I'm working again tonight. Celebrate success in advance. Good night for now.